Welcome, welcome, welcome.
A notable welcome to all you music lovers.
To something that
I like to call
Journey
to the stage. It's all about music.
Music.
And more.
music.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back
Your host. Your host.
and our dad.
Brian.
Fraser.
I hereby reconvene the Dead Poets Society.
Hey everyone, welcome to Journey to the Stage. This is Brian Fraser, and I am so grateful that you've tuned in for part 2 of the final chapter of my up-close and personal chat with guitarist, singer, songwriter, and producer, Phil Keaggy. If you have not listened to part 1 yet, I'd highly recommend that you start there. If you're listening to the podcast version of this episode, you can find episode 49 there. If you're watching on YouTube, just click on the channel and you'll find the video version there. Phil and I recorded our chat on February 3rd, 2023, so he and Bernadette celebrated their 50th anniversary in July of 2023. During our chat, Phil mentioned his desire to sing more music with Jeremy Casella, and I'm happy to report that they have indeed made some more music together. At the time of this release, Phil Keaggy and friends have released a brand new album called Pilgrimage, where Phil and Jeremy team up for 5 of the 10 or so songs that are on that album. There are also some other very, very talented singers and songwriters and musicians, and it's all based on the poetry of Kevin Belmonte. It's a beautiful album, and I'll put the link for that so you can get your own copy of that via download in the description below. Before we jump into part 2 of our chat, I want to thank Tom Gulata for helping me make initial contact with Phil. Tom also runs Phil's Bandcamp page, and I can tell you that I have never seen a more epic or impressive Bandcamp page than the one that Phil has. The link for that will be in the episode description. You can buy downloads there of Phil's music. You can become a VIP member, and doing those things will help to support our friend Phil Keaggy so he can continue to make wonderful music. Lastly, I want to thank all of season 2 of my guests: Dennis Dykin of the Smithereens, whom I had on twice; John Jackson, who was my very first guest, came back, we talked about Elvis; Jen and Samantha from Rivoli; legendary vocalist Ron Hicklin; Wayne Everett, Wayne Kirkpatrick, Mike Stand, Michael Lockwood, Ben Balmer, John Shabaglian, Dan Murphy, Sir Please, Blue Water Highway, Trapper Shop, Glenn Phillips, Florence Dorr, John Schlitt, and last but not least, Phil Keaggy. Season 3 is slated to kick off in November of 2023 with my up-close and personal interview with legendary bassist Carol Kay. It's recorded and just awaiting editing. I'm thankful for each of you who have listened this season. You are the reason we're seeing encouraging growth, so thank you so much. There is so much ahead of us in this interview with Phil. Phil's going to play 2 of my absolute favorites in studio for us, and we're going to hear from a couple more of Phil's friends and dig into so much of Phil's great storytelling and history. At the end of part 1, Phil had just played for us a special in-studio performance of the Beatles' great Here Comes the Sun by the late George Harrison. We're going to pick it up right after that and dive into our chat about the impact of the Beatles on Phil. Here is part 2 of this up-close and personal special with Phil Keaggy on Journey to the Stage. So I've had the pleasure of speaking to a number of very, very talented artists, and the majority of them would cite the Beatles as their prime influence. Obviously, they've left their impact on you. How does that influence, you think, manifests itself in the music that you're making today?
I think because Paul and John and George were melodic people, they really were. They wrote very beautiful melodies, and so I grew up in the generation where, the artists of the 60s were influenced by the music of the 40s and 50s. So it's different than today, My music is definitely more old-fashioned. The Beatles definitely left their mark. I think I got into other musical guitar styles because of the music of it, not necessarily because of the songwriting aspect of it, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
The Beatles were a complete package, and in terms of like interesting music as well as good sounding harmonies and vocal performances. And let's not leave Ringo out because he was just a terrific drummer as well. And George Martin.
Yes, absolutely.
He added so much to the Beatles sound.
I love the fact that in one set list you can have, Be Thou My Vision, a 1,500-year-old song, and Rocky Raccoon. I think that is so unique.
Oh, it's probably because somebody shouted it out and asked me to do it, and yeah. And I do. I do silly things like try to play songs I don't completely know.
Oh, it's so fun. And to me, that song has one of the funniest lyrics ever. Her name was McGill. She called herself Lil, but everyone knew her as Nancy. I just think that is so funny.
I think it's interesting that Paul eventually married a Nancy.
Yes, that is.
Yeah.
Well, and then speaking of Paul, so let's talk about that. I know you've talked about that in other places, but this is something that I'm so fascinated by. You had a chance to meet Paul, and not only meet him, but sit down and play some music together. Tell that story, because I'm utterly fascinated by this.
Okay, well, my former pastor, Scott Ross, he was working at CBN, and he contacted me one day. He said, Phil, you got to meet Laura Eastman. She's working in the creative production department. They want to do a song and a video about the Living Bible, which they were releasing, and it's called The Book, if you remember that. So I said, yeah, I'd love to talk to her. He said, by the way, she's Linda McCartney's sister. I go, whoa. And so we went down to Virginia, my wife and I went into the studio. They had a song written called Discover the Book. It's somewhere on the Bandcamp site. I don't know which backroom tracks it's on, but it was never released. And they proceeded to make a video with quite a production. Warren Marcus from New York City was the director, and Laura Eastman was the producer. But then they cut the funds, and so it was never able to be finished. And I was the artist, doing this. And in the location, they had a lot of extras, and it was filmed in an old hotel, historic hotel, but it never was finished. But we became friends. Then Laura moved to New York City. Whenever I played in the area, she and her fiancé Donald would come, and we also would meet up with our friends Paul and Susan Malis, who ended up being our ride, and they were with us at the wedding, because Laura asked me if I would play in her wedding, and I said, absolutely. She said, could you make it in September 1990? And I said, well, yeah, I'll look at my schedule. And she planned her wedding weekend around the weekend I was free, and so
really, wow,
that was quite something. I didn't have to cancel any dates, and I said, well, this weekend's free. She said, well, that's a good time. We'll get married. I think that's how it went. Now I could be mistaken, and I don't know if I'm just muddying the waters here, but all I know is there was a weekend free, and that was the weekend that we went up to New York. We flew to New York, and then Paul and Susan picked us up. Before I made the trip, I told my good friend Jim Olson, I play his guitar, the Olson guitar. I told him, I said, Laura told me that Paul and Linda and their children are in the wedding party, which kind of shocked me. I go, oh, gee, no way. I've got to sing in front of him. And
yeah, right, right.
And I was the only music in the wedding. It was just, I sang 3 songs, What a Wonder You Are, Here and Now, and the two of you. And then I Love You, Lord, as an instrumental. There were pictures of the groomsmen standing, very proper, and there's Paul leaning forward, really listening. And but Jim told me, he said, I've got this left-handed Olson that I made for a fellow who can't pay for it, but it would mean the world to me if you could put it into Paul's hands. I said, well, I'll ask Laura. After the wedding, before the reception dinner, she says to Paul, we're going to meet upstairs in her brother's, one of the guest rooms. Phil's got something he wants to give you. And so Paul and Linda, Bernadette and I, just the 4 of us went up. And Linda said, hey, Phil's got something special for you. And he opens it up and he looks at it, and it's this beautiful Olson guitar, left-handed. Yeah. And he goes, it's beautiful. And he looks in, he smells the sound hole and the freshness of the guitar. And he goes, no, where's yours? And I said, oh, it's right over there. He goes, get it, and so.
Wow.
So we sat there, and I what am I going to do? So I started playing his songs, like a little bit of Blackbird, Put It There from Flowers in the Dirt. And then he started doing a little bit of a 12-bar blues. And But we actually tinkered on the guitars together for about 15, 20 minutes. And then we were called down to the reception dinner, and he said, "Why, I'd love to just stay here and play." And he wasn't really, "Okay, let me show you what I know, and let me sing one of my songs." He didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
So I started singing one of his songs, and I said, "You want to sing along? It's your song." and so we did, And I think the thing I remember the most was "Put It There." And he was really kind, and he paid me a compliment about the songs I sang in the wedding. He said, "You did a fine job. You sound a bit like James Taylor, or you remind me a bit of James Taylor," which I never got that. It must have been my receding hairline. I don't know what it was, but I stuck really straight to the tune and the melody. I didn't want to act like I'm showing off in front of my hero. It was an odd thing. I kept focusing on Bernadette, and I focused on the bride and the groom. And every once in a while, I'd glance, and there's Paul. And and his wife and daughters, and his son was the ring bearer, James. So it was just a real happy time, though. It really was.
Well, I know there's that famous picture of you guys. It looks like you're sitting on a bed. You guys are playing your guitars together, and you've probably seen this, but I love it because in our world we call it when Paul McCartney met Phil Keaggy.
Oh, gee.
So Paul's son, James, he's not a full-time musical artist, but he's got 2 albums out that are really good. They're very different from one another, but they're definitely worth listening to. Very well written. I've always, in my head, wished that James McCartney and Julian Lennon would get together and make an album and call it Lennon McCartney. I just think that would be so fun, but they probably never will, but because they're both really talented in their own right.
Yeah, it would be nice. I'd like to hear it, I'd like to hear something like that. And, of course, Sean Lennon is talented, too, isn't he?
Sure, yeah.
And there's Zachary Starr, who played with The Who, and he's played with the Ringo Starr All-Star Band.
Yeah,
and,
in fact, Ringo's on tour right now. I need to go. I'd love to catch him. That would be so much fun.
I did see him once live with his All-Star Band. It was
nice.
It was great. The fella from the Raspberries, All By Myself. What's his name?
Oh, was it Eric Carmen? Eric Carmen.
It's Eric Carmen, talented guy. He was playing with Ringo Starr's band, and so was Jack Bruce. Yeah.
Didn't Joe Walsh play with him for a while? Do I remember that incorrectly?
Oh, yeah, they're good buddies, of course.
Well, it's so interesting because a lot of McCartney's post-Beatles work reminds me of you for some reason. Like his album, Flaming Pie, which is maybe my favorite album by him. It came out in 97, the year I got married.
I know, I love that album. Sure, yeah.
So every time I listen to Little Willow...
Yeah, I love that song.
It reminds me of you for some reason. I would love to hear you put that in a set list sometime. But for some reason, you always come to mind when that song comes on. It's a wonderful little song.
What a sweet compliment.
So 68, Glass Harp, you guys get together. You put out 3 albums. And as you mentioned, when you became a Christian, you venture out on your own. And then 73, that's when What a Day comes out. So, as you mentioned, it's the same year you got married. So that work is coming up on its 50th anniversary as well. Your solo album, your first, really the launching of your solo career. And you have fans that have been with you that entire time. Do you ever get to connect with people? Yeah, I was a fan since that, first album. What's that like for you to maybe connect with people who've been, fans of your music for that long?
Oh yeah, well, one of my dear friends, Peter York, when I left Glass Harp, Peter and I began to play out as a duo for a number of years. And then my wife and I moved to upstate New York, and Peter moved to California. But we did 72 and 73, 74. We played together. And some of our concerts are up on the Bandcamp site.
Right, I've seen those, yeah.
And they're very special. They're very special to me. We remained friends all these years. We know a family from Buffalo that we've known since What a Day came out, the Averys, Frank and Laurie. Neil Williams, I shared the song The Answer with him in the summer of 1970, and he became a Christian, and he's also been a huge support of Glass Harp and my music over the years. This album, we're going to put out a deluxe version of What a Day.
Cool.
It's been remastered. It was remastered 10 years ago, and it sounds beautiful. It was remastered by Gary Hedden, who actually was the engineer. And we're going to have the demos, and we're going to have alternate mixes.
Nice.
I've got all the tracks in digital and Pro Tools, and Tom Galata, who's my big helper, with the Bandcamp Patreon site. He we sat together and we did remixes of so people could hear different things and different way of listening to the album, just for ear candy. To me, the original mixes can't be beat. Gary Hedden and I were in the studio together, and his geniusness, his geniosity, really did a fine job considering the equipment we used at the time. But
sure.
So that's coming out soon. I wish we could put it on LP at the same time. That would be the cherry on top of the cake.
Oh, can you imagine? Yeah. It's so hard these days to get vinyl because there's been such an increase in production, but there's so few places that are doing it. It just takes forever, and it's expensive and everything.
Yeah.
Well, it's neat to hear you talk about people that have been with you that long. So I'm like you. I love having friends that are older than me. And I have the blessing of being good friends with a guy named Dan Morrow. We often share lunch together, talk music, and he is one of those 50-year Phil Keaggy fans. And when he found out that we were going to be sitting down for a chat, he sent me a note. It was really just for me. It was something but I got his permission to share this. And so I want to share with you what he wrote, because I think you'll find it very special.
Okay.
Dan says that Phil has been such an inspiration in my life. I too come from a big Catholic family. I'm the 8th of 10. He said, my mom was dying of cancer, and I left to drive with a friend in a Volkswagen bus from New Jersey to California. I felt I just had to go. This was June of 1973. Received the Lord in California in August of 73, then hitchhiked back to New Jersey to be with my mom. Made it in 4 days. I read my New Testament all along the way and gave my friend a cassette to listen to on the way home. What a day. When I got to New Jersey, I shared the love song albums with my 2 younger brothers, and that was the catalyst to bring them to the Lord the next year. Phil's music was used to bring many to faith in the Lord, just as I had been. Paul Clark and Friends, it was good to be home. I grew up in the Word because of those pioneers. Then he goes on to write, just a little bit left. When second chapter of Acts did How the West Was Won tour, Phil was introduced by Buck Herring as on loan from a fellowship in upstate New York, something called Love In, which you'll remember, with his band called David. I was at that concert in the Oakland Auditorium where some of that was recorded. Margaret was 7 months pregnant at that time. Margaret's his wife. And just so you know, kind of the PS to this is, as he mentioned, his wife was 7 months pregnant at that concert. They went on to name their son Philip.
Oh, wow. What a very, very sweet, Bernadette and I were married just a month, and we drove a Ford van all the way to California from Ohio. She was 18, I was 22, and I played the next 3 months with Love Song. I toured with them up and down the coast, and came to the Midwest and to the East Coast. And that was 73. That was the year What a Day was recorded. I got married. Then Love Song became, they were my favorite band. Their harmonies, the heart and soul. In fact, just just yesterday, Tommy Coombs and Chuck Girard were in my studio. And I'm doing some of the backing soundtrack music for their documentary coming out. And so they were here to give their input, and that was wonderful to have them here. And I see them pretty regularly, especially Tommy. The second chapter of Acts, I loved their voices. I loved their albums. And Buck Herring invited me to play in the volume of the book in 1975. That's where I got to meet these wonderful players like Michael Lamardian and Jay Graydon David Kemper on the drums. And then the next year, in 76, Buck produced my Love Broke Through album. That's when I met Keith Green.
Wow.
Jim Gordon was our drummer. Leland Sklar was our bass player. And Larry Knechtel was our keyboard player. And of course, the second chapter of Acts, we're singing with Milo Lefevre, BGVs.
Yeah.
And just wonderful times. So whenever we have the chance to go west, all kinds of wonderful things would open up for us, for me and Bernadette, and friendships, and a good chance to get away from New York. And so that was pretty special times.
Oh, that's incredible. You know, when I came to the Lord, all I owned was concert T-shirts from rock bands that I loved, and my hair was halfway down my back. I remember I was at a music store. This was 1987, and the cover of your album, The Wind and the Wheat, caught my eye. I wasn't familiar with your music yet, and it was so weird, and I still do this to this day. I will buy an album, a CD or something, simply because I'm drawn to the cover art. Because in my mind, okay, if somebody has something this beautiful on the outside, there's got to be some great music on the inside. So I bought The Wind and the Wheat, really not knowing what I was going to be in for. So that really sparked a lifelong love affair with instrumental music. It was so different than anything I had ever listened to. I was an 80s rock and roll kid. It's still a very, very special album to me. Yeah,
Tommy Coombs produced that album.
Oh, really?
I got to work with great players like Harlan Rogers, Jeff Lambs, Ron Tutt, who was Elvis's drummer for many years, Alex Acuna, Alex McDougall.
Alex Acuna, he's a great
drummer. Yeah. Oh, so whenever we went west, great experiences musically would happen. You know, even the two Paul Clark albums, that Paul Clark and Friends albums, they were recorded in Oklahoma with two of the members of Love Song and Bill Spear, you know, John Mailer, Jay Truex, and Bill Spear on keys, Paul on acoustic, and I played acoustic and electric and classical, and those were always great experiences for me. I sure do remember them fondly. And the How the West Was Won tour was really a lot of fun. What was your friend's name who wrote that?
That was Dan Morrow. Yeah,
Dan
great
Morrow.
Brother.
Oh, Dan Morrow. Friend. Please say hello for me to him.
I certainly will do that. He will be listening, and he'll be, I won't say he'll be doing backflips, but in his mind he will be doing backflips. Good. I've mentioned in other places that somehow, at least in my mind, music is almost, or an album can be kind of like a little bit of a time machine. And when I think about Phil Keaggy and Sunday's Child, that album came out my senior year in high school. And anytime I play that song, it takes me back to when I was, 17, 18 years old. One of my favorite cuts from any album you've put out is Blessed Be the Ties. I know Lynn Nichols wrote that. I think you're a co-writer on that. I think there isn't there another co-writer. Who else wrote that? Steve Taylor.
Steve Taylor wrote the lyrics. Yeah.
Yeah,
he wrote the lyrics. I had some lyrics, but they just weren't strong enough. Steve was definitely gifted with the message of the lyrics, deep words actually. And but Lynn and I wrote the music, and I got to play bass on that song. I played bass on that song and Tell Me How You Feel, and I Always Do, the Mark Hurd song, one of the Mark Hurd songs.
Yeah, right.
And it was a good band. A lot of good members in that album. A lot of good members. A lot of talented people. Joined up.
Well, it is such a special album, and I think that song in particular, is probably not one that would have been released as a single or anything like that, but because there were so many other great tracks on it. But to me, that song has always resonated. I love the lyric, the melody, and as we were mentioning before we started recording, the way you sing that song, the way it just fits in your range and everything, it's just so beautifully sung. You feel up for playing a little bit of it for us?
Sure, yeah.
I'd love it. I'd love to hear some of it.
Okay.
Out of the single life into the family way. So many scripted lines, so many roles to play. Ever a pressure pressing, ever an undertow. Why do the ties you've chosen slowly pull you low? Oh, an emotion cries Sing blessed be the ties. Under the veil he walks, through the relentless chill, ever to bear your grief, ever rejected still. Out of the deep he pulls you, into the arms you trust. Nothing can separate us from the ties that bind to you. And as your spirits rise, sing blessed be the ties. An abbreviated version there.
So I didn't realize until I was preparing for our chat that our mutual friend Derry Doherty sings backup on a couple of the tracks on that album. That was pretty cool for me to realize. Yeah. I didn't know that before.
Yeah. Oh, what a nice voice he has, huh?
To this day, he's still one of my favorite vocalists. I just really love Derry. 1991, Steve and Derry are from the choir are putting together a project called At the Foot of the Cross, and you sing my favorite song on that project. It's a song that Steve wrote, and it was so interesting. Last week I was talking to Steve Hindalong, and he was sharing with me a little bit about that project and how you became involved and all that. And Steve was kind enough to send me a little recording about that, and I want to play that for you here. So
okay.
Here's Steve Hindalong.
Hey, yeah, when Phil recorded that song for us, Clouds Around About You, for our At the Foot of the Cross album, it was such a big thrill for me. I had actually written that song many years before, and I'd sang it in our church youth group, probably in the early 80s, I think, in my early 20s. And but it really seemed to fit on At the Foot of the Cross, so somehow I got a hold of... I didn't know Phil at the time. I mean, I might have met him, but I don't think so. But I got... He was living in Nashville at the time, and we were in L.A., and I managed to get in communication with his manager, and he agreed to hear a cassette. I mailed Phil a cassette of me singing the song. He was so gracious. He got back to us, and he wanted to do it. He made it his own. I think he made a chord change, and he did it his own way. He sent us many versions, and he had some kind of recording device in his house. I don't know what it was, but where there could be a split signal. So he had his guitar on one side, his acoustic, and his vocal on the other. And he did some real instrumental stuff as well, solo. So we ended up combining. We picked our favorite vocal take and found some of his beautiful guitar playing and edited it together. I don't remember the technology back then, but we're on 2-inch tape. And then Derry and I played along with it. He played in such good time that I was able to add percussion to it, and then Derry and I sang harmony to it. And it was pretty thrilling because he was, we didn't have any famous people on the record. He was the most, we had Buddy and Julie Miller, but they weren't really known at the time. And so most of the people were just people in our little world. But anyway, it turned out great. And then he came and was on tour. And I remember his road manager contacted me at one point and said, "Hey, Phil's going to be playing it." I think it was Calvary Chapel Downey. It was. And he's going to play that song tonight. And I was so excited I went there and was in the audience. And he actually said from the stage, "Here's a song that Steve Hindalong wrote." And then he played it, this beautiful version. And it was just so meaningful. It was just an absolute thrill for me at that point. And then since then, I've got to know Phil, and we've worked together on some musical endeavors. He actually lives really close to me right now. And not too long ago, his wife and him invited me over for dinner. But I'm not close friends with Phil, but I I am, I'd say, a good friend, and I appreciate him very much. And a lot of people don't know that, of course, later we did that song, Clouds, on Chase the Kangaroo album. Well, actually, no, we had done that earlier. I'm getting mixed up here. We had done that in 1987, but people don't know that I actually wrote the version that's on At the Foot of the Cross many, many years before. I'll always be grateful for Phil doing that.
Clouds around about you, clouds around about you, clouds around about you, shadows veil your eyes, shadows veil your eyes. The sower comes by morning to scatter light like seed. Clouds around about you, shadows veil your eyes, shadows veil your eyes. And when we come as children, you give us all we need. Clouds around about you, shadows veil your eyes, shadows veil your eyes. Clouds around about you, clouds around about you, clouds around about you. Shadows veil your eyes, shadows veil your eyes.
That's pretty cool. I love that song. It's a wonderful song, and
It is.
very
It's
well done.
a beautiful song. You know, I had a reel-to-reel 8-track, 7-inch reels. That's what I recorded to, and
okay.
I was able to separate my guitar from my voice, and I loved it. I thought it was one of the prettiest songs. And Steve is not only a fine percussionist and drummer, but he's also a really fantastic producer. And I remember he produced me a couple other times. And I just thought he was always just so great and encouraging there at the soundboard, you know, at the console. And he was fun to work with.
He's one of my favorite lyricists. He is a wonderful, wonderful lyricist. Mm-hmm. Very, very talented. So that album came out in 91. That was the same year Beyond Nature came out. And as you look through your discography, you really were putting out an album just about every year through this phase. I mean, it was album, tour, album, tour, rinse, repeat. That can be a little bit challenging, I would imagine. But you were really going full throttle back then. Was that tough, being away from home? What was it like in that period of time?
It was. I was never a fan of touring. Mm-hmm. I just never was a tour animal. And I remember during the time, 1984, I did the Getting Closer album, and then I was doing a lot of dates across the country. At the time, I was living in California, and I'd get pretty weary of that whole road experience. And then when we'd put bands together, we'd be on buses, and of course, it only made sense to go out for 2 to 3 weeks sometimes, and I didn't like that. And so in 1987, I did a 5-week tour in England, Scotland, and Wales with Sheila Walsh and a British band. And when I came home from that, and we had a 3-month-old son, Ian, who was born in 87, I said to Brenda, I'm not going to tour anymore, just weekends. And so from that point on, I just did weekends. And even when I did the Master and Musician 30th anniversary tour in 2008, we just did weekends, and then we'd come home, So I made my family a priority. I wanted to be home. I wanted to take my kids to school. I wanted to pray with them at night and not be missing, I made that decision. I never regretted it. There were some people in the business who weren't real happy with my choice, but I think it's really been better for my family.
Absolutely.
And, And now I hardly do any dates at all these days. I'm mostly just working in the studio, and just occasionally go out and do something, maybe if it's a drive date, someplace reasonable distance.
In that album, is such a wonderful one, Beyond Nature. It has some of my favorite Phil Keaggy tunes on it. It's an instrumental album. It's
special. It's a special album.
It is. Addison's Walk has long been a favorite of mine. I love the oboe at the end. It's such a nice and beautiful. Those are beautiful lines that are played there.
Oh yeah. You know, that album was sandwiched between. Well, I did Find Me in These Fields. Mm-hmm. No, Sunday's Child, Find Me in These Fields. Then the next year I did Beyond Nature. Then the next year Crimson and Blue.
What a stretch of albums, yeah.
So there were these 3 rock albums and then this beautiful, quiet album, Beyond Nature, which is pretty special. It was me retreating into the acoustic after touring so much. You know, I toured with Randy on the Sunday's Child tour, and then there was the Find Me in These Fields. I had a band touring during those days. I did the album with JB, Jim Baird, who engineered and co-produced Beyond Nature. Don Hart did the strings and woodwinds, wrote those, and that became a very special album. In fact, it's up there in my top 5 favorite albums I've ever done. Yeah.
Really? Now, did you get any pushback from, your recording company? Because, they probably wanted another Sunday's Child, but here you are saying, I want to do something that's instrumental, that's more acoustic. Did they push back at all, or did you have the freedom to kind of do what you wanted?
I think I had such a vision for doing that my A&R guy, really good guy, Mark Maxwell, he said, that sounds lovely. He was very encouraging. So he was my A&R guy. So I took a break from, the electric guitars and the Vox amps and the bands and just went in and did this album with acoustic guitars and a classical guitar and a little bit of, I think there's a bass on 1 or 2 songs, I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. But it was, to me, it was an oasis that I needed at the time. I was doing a lot of walking the trails, hiking, because before that I was an avid runner, and I went from being a runner to a hiker, and spent more quiet time in the woods, and I would reflect. I'd hear melodies in my heart, come home, break out the guitar, come up with an alternate tuning. Like there's a number of songs on there that are alternate tunings, and that was nice to do. Addison's Walk, for instance, is an alternate tuning. Here, I'll play you a bit of it, okay?
I would love it. I love this song so much.
Yeah, I'll play a little bit of it.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Since you like to walk in the woods, that you should see. If I lived back there, I would walk with you. But you should invite Hindalong. He actually they have a song about that. The chorus is, "I want to take a walk in the woods with a friend." So he's a good one to walk with. He enjoys walking out in there. Okay. So I'm curious, what makes the way you pick different from other players? Like, I love James Taylor, Paul Simon, and they're finger pickers as well, but the way you pick is different. What makes it different, the way that you play, than from what we might hear in kind of more of a traditional finger picking type of style?
Well, First of all, I've only got 9 fingers, so that affects it. I'm missing a finger on my right hand. The middle finger had an accident when I was 4 or 5 years old on a water pump on the farm, and climbed up on it, and it fell through the shaft. You know, It went down toward the well, and it caught the actual spigot caught my finger in my hand, and took it off. You know, and they actually tried to sew it back on, but it just wouldn't take, as they say. And but I remember that day like it was last week. It was the memory is totally vivid. I remember what my dad was wearing. I remember him running to rescue me, and I remember going the ride to the hospital. I remember the ether coming down on my face, and when they put me out to operate on me, and remember waking up and the family being there to cheer me up. Yeah, it was traumatic for a little kid. And
I can imagine.
Yeah, I just, when I really got serious about playing more acoustically and try to play well acoustically, I'd say probably from 1970 onward. I had a style where I'd hold a pick and use like as if it's the ring finger on the right hand. Then I learned how to, by the time mid-70s, and for a master musician, I was using all my fingers instead of holding a pick. And that's how I play now. In fact, even in electric, half the time I play my electric without a pick at all.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
If it calls for a pick, I'll use a pick. Everyone's got their own style, and their own signature when it comes to the technique you use to play left hand and right hand,
Well, it's amazing to me that even though you only have 9 fingers, your playing is so clean, and the fact that's something that people often talk about. Obviously, that part of it is done with your left hand on the fretboard, but there's no real loss there. You can't detect anything in your playing. That's really incredible how you've been able to compensate for that.
There's loads of mistakes when it comes to live performance. I'm not perfectionist, but in the studio, I like to get it as good as I can and get it right. Try to get it where it really is musically sound. So technically as well as sonically, the best I can.
When do you feel most creative? Are there conditions? Just a time of where you have some reflection, or are there situations, settings that help you to feel more creative than other times? Is there a time when you feel like, wow, I've got something kind of burning in my belly here, or something that you want to let it out and record something? When do you feel that?
I don't feel it as often as I did when I was younger. But then again, I wrote songs that weren't so necessary when I was younger too. I mean, there are throwaways on several of my albums, songs that I don't care really to listen to. But then there are songs that really are from the heart. Like I would cite, for instance, most of the album Way Back Home is very special to me, and
it's deeply personal.
It's very personal, yeah. And then there are songs that someone else suggested that I do. They said, that's a pretty good song. There's a couple songs I had to fight for, like there was a tune called I Have Days Like You, which I just think it's a nice song. It's kind of Wilburys-ish, a little bit. I like that song a lot, but I had to kind of fight for that when I was with the label. Now, I've been independent off a major label since 2002. I got my own little imprint called Stroby Records. It's just a name. It's no big deal. It's not a corporation or anything like that. It's just...
But it's yours.
It's mine. And my dad, when I was a kid, he used to say to me, Petey, my initials just PT. He'd say, Petey, play me some of that Stroby, he'd say to me.
Oh, wow.
That's where that came from. He called it Stroby. And so I kind of stuck with that and made my little label imprint that, When it comes to, like, if I'm looking for something, I really love to record something. Oftentimes, I end up just collaborating with somebody who sends me a lyric. Recently, I've written music to 6 poems by Kevin Belmonte, who's a really fine author of books. G.K. Chesterton, C.S. Lewis, William Wilberforce. He's written books, and he's very intelligent, but has a lot of heart and loves the gospel. And I've written some songs with other people who provided a poem for me, and then I'll put that to music. And that that stirs me, and there's some stuff that's on the Backroom Tracks 13. Nina Ahlstrom from Finland sent me lyrics, and I put that to music. One of it's called I Will Wait for You. I came up with the music, and Rex Schnelly helped me produce it. And that's one of those special songs. David Hirsch, he's written a lot of lyrics and sent them to me, and I put music to David Hirsch's music, or his lyrics. He's also a songwriter in his own right. He's also a pastor, a talented man. I've done instrumental projects, collaborations with Jeff Johnson, who's such a talented man.
I have been, probably for the last week or so, I've spent a lot of time with those recordings that you did with Jeff Johnson, particularly Ravenna. These mosaics are just beautiful pieces, and I love these albums. These were new to me until I started doing my preparation for our time together, and I was like, wow, I have missed this, and it's just wonderful music.
Oh yeah, he's such a gifted man, and I love working with Jeff. And these songs, these pieces, and all the albums are very, very well worked out, and
they are. Yes. What I love is how collaborative you are, and you've put together such a great body of work with other players. What is it about working with others that is so important to you?
I think others bring something out of you that you can't draw out of yourself. They also make you more sensitive to what else can be spoken musically.
Yeah.
And they also create a call and response that you respond to, musically. And so that's why sometimes groups have a special appeal to people, whereas individual artists, not so much, it seems, unless they are a James Taylor or, somebody who is exceptional as a solo artist, That's why some people say, well, Phil, my favorite album of yours is Sunday's Child. It's probably because there's so much collaboration going on that album.
Well, it's a great pop album. I mean, it's just, the songs are so great. I mean, it's just, you're right, but it is very collaborative.
And so it's like you're part of a family in that sense, I love what other people bring to the table musically.
Well, that's great. And I know one of your key collaborators, and somebody I know who's very special to you, is Randy Stonehill. And so I reached out to Randy, and I told him that you and I were going to be chatting. And I said, hey, you want to record a little note for your buddy Phil? And this is what he sent me. I think this is really cool. Give this a listen here.
Hey, Phil. Who's your pal? Who's your buddy? It's me, Strandy Reinschnitz. Or I mean, Randy Stonehill. Hey, let me just say that our friendship has been one of life's great blessings, and playing music with you, my friend, is always a joy. And furthermore, you are the Godzilla of rock. You get up in the morning, you eat Tokyo for breakfast. Oh, yes. You know you do. Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
I love you, buddy. God bless you.
Oh, my gosh. I love Randy. We did an album together in my studio here in 2008 or so, 2008 I think it was. It was called Mystery Highway.
I was just listening to that last night, actually.
It's just so much fun, and I've got all these outtakes of him going off, and because he knows I laugh at him, and that feeds him. And but he's so creative, he's so funny, and he's so sincere and so sweet. I do love Randy a lot. And my memories of touring with him, recording with him. We've been to Haiti together, Ecuador. He's got a real heart for kids. And I just love that guy a lot. And, we go back a long way. I met him and Larry Norman on the same day in May of 1972 in Cincinnati.
Oh, my.
It was a glass harp. Glass harp was playing out in this outdoor venue, and then it started to rain, and we had to all go inside and then resume the concert indoors. But and so while they were changing up the stage and getting the gear off the stage and moving it, we just hung out in a hotel and got to know each other. And I was 21 at the time, and I guess Randy was close to the same age, and Larry too. He might have been a year older or two, I'm not sure, but I did concerts with Larry Norman back in the day, but
Really? Wow.
but I did a lot of concerts and a lot of touring with Randy.
Yeah.
We've been all over America. We went to New Zealand, Australia. Yeah, I love the guy, and I'm so glad that I'm a part of his 50th celebration album called "There's a Rainbow Somewhere." I hope people pick it up.
I do too. As I mentioned, I'll put a link for that in the podcast description. And apparently, you've been to Tokyo, and you have eaten Tokyo for breakfast. Apparently, according to Randy. So
never been over there. Never been to Asia. Never been in that side of the world.
At this stage of life, what are the things that bring you joy, that put a smile on your face these days?
My grandboys. I've got three grandsons. Bern and I have three grandsons, and they're a big portion of what we're about nowadays. They're just little fellas, But the 3-year-old and the almost 2-year-old, Towns and Ezzy, our daughter Olivia's sons, and then our son Ian, his son is Noah, and they're just fantastic little people, and we love them. We spend a lot of time with them, and we're grateful that we live close to them.
Beautiful.
And they love to come down the studio, bang on the drums, and pluck on the guitars, and
yes,
sing into the microphone, and we have a blast together. Yeah, we sure do. We go down the creek, skip stones, and throw rocks, and just walk around the neighborhood, and so that's probably what really gives me a great thrill these days. I must say. I
know last weekend you sent me a picture of your grandson who just turned 1. That was Ian's son, right? That just turned 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's got Keaggy eyes.
Yeah. He's got his father's eyes and his grandfather's probably, except they're brown. His mother is a beautiful. She's half Filipino, and she's a beautiful lady. They're a beautiful family. My son is extremely handsome, and he gets that from his mom, primarily.
Well, I don't know, Phil. He looks a lot like you. Let's be honest. I've seen his pictures when I know he was in Hot Shell Ray for several years.
Yes, he was.
So I was watching, listening to a lot of that work and stuff, and he looks a lot like his dad. Well,
there's a picture I put side by side of the two of us when we were both 21, and it's amazing. The thing is, he's going to be able to keep his hair. I've lost most of my hair on top, but he's got a really good, strong head of hair because of his grandfather on his mom's side. His grandfather, he kept his hair too.
Well, so, he got the best of both worlds then, huh?
yeah. But he's got a lot of talent, my son Ian, and I love him. He's got a great heart, and he's
wonderful.
really, really special to me.
You listen to yourself play that 8th grade Phil, 11-year-old Phil. If you had 5 minutes to sit down with that young buck who was playing those surf tunes, what do you think you might share with him?
I'd say probably, hey, kid, just relax a little bit, Slow down, What's the hurry? Well, when I see young musicians, I love to encourage them. I said, be patient with yourself, keep joyful in what you're doing. Don't berate yourself. Don't beat yourself up. Music is something you want to be able to share with others to make them happy and help bring some fulfillment and joy to them, some hope, some beauty in the world. That's what it means to me, and that's what I would share with young musicians. Do it because you love it. Don't stress over it. I don't think that's worth it.
Yeah, well, that's a great answer. As we near the end of our time together, as I mentioned earlier, I watched quite a few interviews with you, and I realized we were missing some vital information about Phil Keaggy. So I've got some rapid fire questions for you that we'll end our time with. What favorite books or authors do you have?
I always loved Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Mm-hmm. I like biographies of people that really made a difference in our world. Mm-hmm. There were some Philip Yancey books I really enjoyed. I enjoyed some Malcolm Gladwell.
It's very interesting writer.
Yeah, my favorite book really is the Bible, though, because seems like it comes right out of the heart of God. Yeah. And if I want to know God, if I want to know what really is in his heart and how good he is, that's where I go.
I like that. What about favorite movies?
I like the old ones. I'm a softie when it comes to movies like Mrs. Miniver, Goodbye, Mr. Chips,
Okay, yeah.
The Best Years of Our Lives, movies that tell a story and have a... But I also love good old comedies, too, Abbott and Costello.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I must say, believe it or not, I indulge once in a while in some Three Stooges with Curly. And,
yes.
There's something about, and I love the classics. I really do. When it comes to movies, every once in a while there is something that comes out. I remember I loved the Chariots of Fire movie. I thought that was wonderful.
Yeah.
That was inspiring.
Excellent. And what might people be most surprised to find in your listening rotation or your music rotation? What would be that band or artist, or even maybe a style that people like, I wouldn't have figured Phil would be listening to that type of music or that artist. What do you have anybody like that might be a surprise to people?
Well, back in 2000, I did an album called Inseparable, and I was listening to a lot of Bjork at the time.
Oh,
I thought it was very creative and interesting music, musically, and I thought the way she just went for it vocally. So that kind of like bled into, it was an influence on that album. In fact, when I presented the album to the record company I was with at the time, they just scratched their heads and said, "Hey, Phil, what are you listening to? Man, what are you listening to?" And I said, well, I didn't even answer because I knew they weren't crazy about the album, but I liked it. And I thought it was a really interesting adventure, making Inseparable. I listen a lot to what I'm working on, and I work with other musicians, and I'm co-writing with people, and I spend more time listening to what I'm creating these days. Like last night, Bern and I put on Spotify and listened to a lot of the classic standards of the 50s.
Yes, yes.
And the 60s. And when songs are written, they're intended to just, make you feel good, and what it's like to fall in love and stuff like that. And so I like that. I'll go back and listen to the old stuff that influenced me oftentimes.
Yeah.
And I do like classical music, not the stuffy kind, but I like Vaughan Williams a lot, and Ravel and Debussy and Edvard Grieg. In fact, one of the songs on Beyond Nature is called Symphonic Dance, and that's an Edvard Grieg composition that I adapted
I didn't know
to
that.
guitar. Mm-hmm.
That's one of the many things I will have learned today.
And then there's a song on In the Quiet Hours, which is an instrumental collection called Fantasy, and that was influenced by Ralph Vaughan Williams, the English composer.
So tell us what's next for you. I know you're not doing as many dates as you used to, but are you planning on venturing out and doing some weekend stuff periodically here and there?
No plans. The next concert I have is in October, but you never know what might happen in between.
Sure.
But, I'm not in a big hurry to get on airplanes and go anywhere, really. I'm grateful I've got a room that I can make music in, and that's what I'm concentrating on, that and our family.
I know that Bernadette's kind of become your quasi-road manager, and so you guys get to do stuff together when you do venture out. So that makes it kind of nice, I'm sure. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, she traveled with me for the last 6 years we were traveling,
And we're just about done, too. So I just want to let everybody know that if you want to hear some great music, Phil has, hands down, the best Bandcamp page I have ever seen. I will put a link to it in the description. There is so much great and wonderful music there. Decades of music. He's got live shows from the 70s up into the last few years, and albums, studio albums, collaborations. There's so much great music there. So I really want to encourage people to go check that out. So Phil, I am so grateful for your time. This has been a good stretch. I'll probably break this into 2 episodes, but I'm so grateful for this chance to connect with you, to hear your wonderful stories, and to hear your heart. So thank you so much for joining me.
Well, I enjoyed it. And, I know there were some questions you didn't cover, but we'll get a chance to talk again someday. Part 3. What do you say?
Sounds like a plan. And they say you should never meet your heroes because they'll disappoint you, but I am so grateful because you have disproven that today, and I'm so grateful to you just for the contribution you've made to the soundtrack of my own life, and so thank you again. I really appreciate you.
You're welcome, Brian. Well, thanks for having me. One more thing, Brian, if I may, I'd like to present an invitation to our listeners. Perhaps there's somebody out there really looking for a new life, an abundant life, and some hope and some peace and the gift of salvation. Jesus said, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away." And he gives us this invitation. He said, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, because I am lowly and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Whatever yoke or burden you are carrying, the Lord Jesus wants to help you with that. I want to encourage our listeners, Brian, that faith comes by hearing the Word of God. Jesus Christ died on the cross for all our sins. God the Father loves us so much that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. I experienced that 53 years ago, and so I'll never forget the day that I let Jesus into my heart. If you want to, could you just pray with me? Lord Jesus, I believe you died for my sins, that you offer forgiveness for all my sins, past, present, and future. Come into my life, change me, and I will follow you. Thank you, Lord, for being my Savior. Amen.
To everyone listening, thank you for sitting at the table with us. If you've enjoyed this chat, share it with others so they can learn about Phil's music if they don't know it already. And reviews and ratings and those types of things go a long way to helping an independent podcast like this. So wherever you are, keep your bags packed and join us on our next Journey to the Stage. And that's a wrap.
All right.